She wasn't his. Rue had been reminding herself of that for 3 years, and the reminder had worn smooth with use. She could still feel the shape of it, but the edges no longer cut. Galt ran the Western Port operation from a glass tower on West Georgia Street. He owned 3 legitimate import firms, a private equity front, and, though no one had ever managed to prove it, the loyalty of half the longshoremen working the docks at Deltaport. He was 41 years old, had a scar through his left brow from something he never explained, and wore his violence the way other men wore expensive watches, quietly, as a signal of what he could afford. Rue had come to him through a back channel, a friend of a friend who needed someone who could make dirty numbers look clean without leaving fingerprints on the paper. She'd grown up in the downtown East Side, the kind of neighborhood that leaves a specific flavor of exhaustion in your bones. The flavor of knowing how the system works before you're old enough to be properly disappointed by it. She'd put herself through 2 years of accounting at BCIT on closing shifts at a 24-hour laundromat, and she'd walked into Galt's office for the so-called interview, already knowing he was going to try to lowball her. He'd pushed a spreadsheet across the desk and asked her to identify any anomalies. She'd found 3 in 7 minutes. One of them was a deliberate test. 2 were actual errors that had been bleeding a front company for 6 months. She'd pointed to the real ones first. Then she'd looked him in the eye and said, "Someone is stealing from you, and it's not one of your enemies." He'd studied her for a long moment, the way a man studies a weapon he's considering purchasing. Then he'd named a salary that made her ears ring. She'd said, "I want the dental too." He'd given her the dental. That was 3 years ago. She was still here. She told herself it was because the money was good, and the alternative was student debt, and a junior audit position at a firm that smelled like carpet cleaner and misplaced optimism. She did not examine the other reasons too closely. The office on the 22nd floor was her territory as much as his. She knew the filing system, the rotation of encrypted drives, the 11 shell companies, and which ones were actively bleeding cash, and which ones were merely decorative. She knew that Galt drank his coffee black with no sugar, that he got a headache behind his left eye when a deal was going sideways, that he was angrier when he was quiet than when he was loud. She had learned him the way you learn a city you've lived in long enough, not by studying a map, but by knowing which streets flooded in November, and which back alley got you across town faster when the main roads were jammed. She did not let herself think about what that meant. On a Tuesday in November, she knocked twice on his office door at 5:40 in the afternoon, walked in and said, "I'm leaving at 6. Galt was standing at the window. Vancouver's harbour spread out below in the grey afternoon light, the North Shore mountains swallowed by low cloud. He turned. The look on his face lasted less than a second. She almost missed it, a flicker behind the usual controlled stillness, like a current running under ice. "You have the Canmore file to finish," he said. "The Canmore file is finished. It's in the green folder on your desk." She picked up her tote bag from the chair where she'd left it. "The morning documents are prepped. The quarterly manifests are tabbed. You have everything you need." He was looking at her the way he sometimes looked at port records that didn't quite reconcile, with careful, calculating attention. "Where are you going?" It wasn't a question. It was the opening move of an interrogation dressed up as conversation. "Out," Rue said. She met his gaze and held it without flinching, which had taken her about 4 months to learn. "Have a good evening, Galt." She heard him say nothing as she walked out. He was still saying nothing when the elevator doors closed. The restaurant was called Fielding's, a narrow room on Commercial Drive with amber lighting and small tables pressed close together, the kind of place that required a reservation 2 weeks out and made you feel, against all odds, like you deserved to be there. Nate was already at the table when she arrived, on his feet before she'd unwound her scarf, pushing her chair back with the slightly flustered energy of a man who genuinely wanted the evening to go well. She'd known him from before, from the time before the glass tower, from the laundromat years. His sister had worked the morning shift. Rue had run into him at a block cleanup 3 weeks ago, standing in the rain with a garbage bag and that same earnest, slightly clumsy goodwill. He'd asked if she'd like to get dinner sometime. She'd said yes, because he was kind and uncomplicated, and she was 31 years old. And she could not remember the last time someone had looked at her like she was worth the trouble without calculating the exchange rate first. They talked for 2 hours. He asked about her work, and she gave him the sanitized version, which she'd practiced until it felt natural. He told her about his contracting firm, about a residential project in Coquitlam he was proud of. He was easy to talk to, the way people are when they have nothing to hide. At some point she laughed, actually laughed, at something ridiculous he said about a load-bearing wall, and felt the tension she carried in her shoulders ease by a small, careful fraction. She didn't notice the shape in the dark beyond the front window. Later she would think about it, the sense of being watched that had moved through her like a cold draft. There and gone in a second. She'd glanced toward the glass and seen nothing except the rain and the streetlights, turning the wet pavement orange. She'd turned back to Nate and let it go. The next morning, Galt was at his desk when she arrived. He looked like he hadn't slept. There was a half-emptied coffee cup at his elbow, and the window behind him was streaked with rain. "How was your evening?" he said, without looking up from the documents in front of him. The phrasing was wrong, not the words. The words were fine. It was the flatness of them, the deliberate lack of inflection, the way a careful person talks when they're working very hard at sounding casual. "Fine," Rue said. She set the morning folder on his desk. The Deltaport confirmation came through. "I've forwarded it." Good. She left his office and sat down at her desk and did not think about it. The texts from Nate started 4 days later. "Hey, something weird is happening at work. Can we talk?" And then, 2 days after that, the firm's being audited. "We've never had a compliance issue." It came out of nowhere. And then nothing. Silence. She texted back twice, no reply. She told herself it happened. People got spooked. A man with a growing business and a sudden crisis had other priorities. She told herself it wasn't personal. She wasn't entirely convinced. It was a Thursday afternoon when she found it. She was processing invoices from the legal firm Galt used for his corporate restructuring. A standard quarterly task, 40 pages of billable hours, most of it vague enough to mean anything. Consultation, strategic review, risk assessment facilitation. She was on page 31 when a line item caught her eye. Prior asset review and commercial relocation advisory, 8 at $900 spa. The date was the Wednesday after her dinner at Fielding's. Rue stared at the screen. Prior. She typed the name into the back-end system she used to track the Syndicate's financial movements, the one she'd built herself 3 years ago when the existing system was a disaster. She found the thread in under 6 minutes. It wasn't destruction. It was more precise than that, and somehow worse for the precision. Galt had arranged for Nate's primary contract to be absorbed by a competitor firm, a quiet acquisition funded through one of the real estate fronts. The acquisition came with a restructuring clause. Nate's position had been reclassified and relocated to a Calgary satellite office with a relocation package that was, by any standard, generous. His Vancouver lease had ended. A new apartment was registered in his name in the Beltline district. He hadn't been ruined. He'd been moved, rearranged like a piece on a board, shifted 2 provinces away with his life intact and his inbox full of logistics he'd had no say in. She sat very still for a long moment. He'd known she would check. That was the thing she couldn't get past. Galt had known she would find the paper trail eventually, and he hadn't bothered hiding it fully, just buried it far enough that it would take her a moment. He'd given Nate a clean exit because he'd known she would audit the damage, and he hadn't wanted her to find rubble. That calculated mercy made it worse, not better. He'd moved a man's entire life across the country, and wrapped it neatly because he understood her well enough to anticipate her reaction. He'd used her own standards against her. She printed the invoice, She highlighted the line item in yellow. She didn't knock on his office door. She never knocked. She walked straight in. Galt was on the phone. He turned when she entered, started to hold up a finger, 1 moment, and then he looked at her face. Whatever was on it made him wrap up the call in 12 seconds flat. He set the phone down. His expression was still, the way still water is still just before something moves beneath it. She crossed the room and placed the invoice on the center of his desk. He looked at it. He looked at the yellow highlight. He didn't reach for it. "Prior," Rue said. Her voice was even. She'd been walking across the floor working to keep it even. Calgary. "He'll be fine," Galt said. "The package." "I know what the package was. I found the package." She put both hands flat on the desk and leaned forward. "You moved him, because he sat across a table from me." Galt said nothing. "You didn't even know him." Her voice slipped, the evenness cracking just slightly, the way it always cracked when she was genuinely angry versus professionally angry. "He builds houses in Coquitlam. He's nobody's enemy. And you rearranged his entire life because he made me laugh." Galt stood up. He was a large man. She'd never not known that. But it registered differently now, the way it registered differently when he moved toward the window than when he moved toward the door. He moved toward her. "He touched your hand." The words came out flat, stripped of everything except the fact. Rue stared at him. "What?" At the table. Galt's jaw was tight. There was something in his voice she'd never heard before, something structural, like a wall developing cracks it wasn't built to have. He put his hand over yours. The silence in the room was enormous. "You were there," Rue said slowly. "Yes." "You stood outside in the rain and watched me have dinner." Galt did not deny it. She felt something cold move through her chest. Not fear. She'd been in rooms with dangerous men long enough that fear had a specific texture. And this wasn't it. This was something else, something that lived adjacent to fury and kept very uncomfortable company with it. "I'm not yours," Rue said. Her voice was quiet now, quieter than the anger deserved, because quiet was more dangerous and she knew it. "I am not a shipping manifest that you get to reroute. I am not one of your port contracts. You don't get to redraw the map of my life because you don't like what's on it." "Rue." "Don't." She straightened. She picked up her bag. "I've spent 3 years making this operation run. I've caught your leaks and covered your exposure and fixed the things you were too distracted to fix. I did it because the work mattered, because you were careful, because I respected the fact that you calculated everything." She looked at him directly. "But this wasn't calculation. This was a tantrum, and I don't work for a man who throws tantrums." "If you walk out," Galt started. "You'll survive," Rue said. "You have the files. You have the system. You know where everything is because I built it to be findable." She moved toward the door. "Give Nate his Vancouver contract back, or don't, and live with the fact that you moved a good man across the country because you couldn't have a single honest conversation." She walked out. The elevator was there. She got in it. She didn't look back. 3 weeks was a very long time to be safe. The new position was at a mid-size logistics company in a glass tower 6 blocks from Galt's, which she'd noticed when she accepted the offer and refused to let change her mind because she had too much stubborn in her blood to give a building the satisfaction. The work was fine. The desk was clean. Her manager used the word synergy in every meeting and meant it earnestly, which Rue found both exhausting and, in a grim way, touching. Nobody needed her to cover an exposure. Nobody's phone rang at 2 in the morning because a shipment had gone sideways and someone on a dock needed to be paid in cash, quickly, without a trail. Nobody looked at her like she was the only person in the room who could fix the particular disaster that was currently unfolding. She ate her lunch at her desk. She watched the rain on the windows. She did not check her old encrypted drives. She definitely did not check the news for port incidents along the lower mainland. She checked both of those things twice. On the 17th day, she was heating up soup in the office kitchen when her personal phone rang. Number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't pick up. Miss Dupont. The voice was Jarvis, Galt's logistics coordinator, the one she'd sent the port schedules to every Friday, the one who never called her directly. I'm sorry to bother you. I didn't know who else to call. The soup was still heating. She turned off the microwave. What happened? She said. Jarvis was waiting in a rental car outside her building at 8:15. He had a cut above his eyebrow that he'd tried to deal with using a gas station bandage. She got in the passenger seat and handed him the small first aid kit she kept in her bag, the one she'd assembled 18 months ago for reasons she'd never examined too carefully. He drove east and gave her the short version. A crew from the east, an outfit that had been probing Galt's port operation for months, watching for an opening, had found one. The opening was the disarray that had set into the operation over the past 3 weeks. Small things, missed meetings, unchecked manifests, decisions delayed because the person who usually prepared the analysis was gone. They'd moved on a warehouse in Richmond. It had been ugly. Galt had dealt with it. She understood this implicitly, the way she understood all the things that happened in warehouses in Richmond after hours, but not cleanly. 2 of his people were hurt. Galt had been shot. He was at a safe house in East Vancouver, refusing medical help. Won't let the doctor near him, Jarvis said. Won't take anything for the pain. He's just sitting there. A pause. He told me specifically not to call you. What street? Rue said. The house smelled like damp concrete and something metallic she identified immediately and chose not to name out loud. The room Jarvis led her to was lit by a single lamp. There was a cot against the far wall, a wooden chair, and a space heater that had seen better decades. Galt was in the chair. Shirtless, his coat draped over his shoulders, a makeshift bandage pressed against his left side that was doing a poor job of what it was supposed to do. His head was tipped back. His eyes were closed. He looked like a man who had decided to wait quietly for whatever came next. Then she moved, and the floorboard creaked and his eyes opened. He looked at her. For a long second he said nothing at all. He looked at her the way she'd watched him look at situations he hadn't prepared for, trying to determine if what he was seeing was real or the result of wishful thinking. On Galt, wishful thinking was so rare she almost didn't recognize it. Jarvis, he said. He didn't tell me, Rue said. I made him. Galt closed his eyes briefly. You should go. Move your arm, she said. She set her bag on the floor and crouched beside him and pulled out the proper kit, the one she'd assembled with the methodical, practical certainty of a woman who has accepted that she exists in proximity to emergencies. She worked without talking, cleaning and packing, and bandaging with the efficiency of someone who does necessary things without sentiment attached. His hand, at some point, settled against her wrist, not gripping, just resting there, the way a man holds onto the one solid thing in the room when everything else is moving. Why are you here? He said. His voice was low, worn down to its basic components. Rue pulled a strip of medical tape and pressed it flat. Because Jarvis called. Because you were bleeding. Because apparently even when you make catastrophically bad decisions, I can't let you sit in a room by yourself and get worse. A pause. I fixed the Calgary situation. She went still. 3 days after you left, I had the contract rerouted back to his Vancouver office. Included a bonus for the disruption. His voice was flat, reporting facts without decoration. He's back. He doesn't know why any of it happened, but he's back. Rue looked up at him. Galt's face was stripped down in the lamplight. All the angles sharper, the scar through his brow more visible, the exhaustion sitting plainly on him without whatever he usually used to disguise it. He looked like a man who had been doing this for a very long time and had recently run out of the specific resource that had made it possible. I know it doesn't undo it, he said. I know it doesn't. He stopped. He was not a man who explained himself. She could see what the effort was costing him. You were right. It was a tantrum. It was the kind of thing I'd have written someone else off for. Yes, she said, it was. I don't know what to do with it. He said the sentence the way a man reads a charge he can't refute. I've managed this operation for 12 years. I know how to assess risk. I know how to calculate exposure. I know how to move people and assets and outcomes. His hand tightened slightly on her wrist. I looked at you laughing at that table, and I lost every single one of those skills. In 12 years, I have never lost them. Rue sat back on her heels and looked at him, the man who ran 3 ports and owned half the relationships that kept this city's underground economy functioning, who was currently sitting in a room in East Vancouver bleeding through a field dressing because 3 weeks without her had made him sloppy. She thought about the logistics office. She thought about synergy. She thought about checking the port news twice. "You don't get to do that again," she said. Goat said nothing. "You don't get to move people. You don't get to make decisions about my life from the outside of it. If you have something to say, you say it. To my face, like a person." She held his gaze steadily. "Those are my terms." "Terms," he repeated. "I do accounting. Everything has terms." Something moved across his face, the closest she'd ever seen him come to something that wasn't controlled. A fracture in the ledger. Some figure that wouldn't reconcile no matter how many times he ran it. "Rue," he said. "Those are the terms, Golt. Take them or don't." He looked at her for a long time. The lamp hummed. The space heater knocked against its own metal casing. "Okay," he said. The word came out rough, like it hadn't been used in a while. She taped the last edge of the bandage flat. She did not stand up. "Also," she said, "I want a raise." The sound he made wasn't quite a laugh, too tired, too worn for that, but it was in the vicinity of one. "How much?" "We'll negotiate when you're not bleeding." "That's strategic." "I've had a good teacher," she said, "when he's not being an idiot." She reached up and put her hand against the side of his face. Not gently, not the way you'd touch something fragile. The way you touch something you've decided belongs to you. His eyes closed. The line of his shoulders, which she'd watched hold the weight of 12 years of calculated violence, dropped by one careful degree. "You should have just told me," she said quietly. "I know." 3 years, Golt. "I know." Outside, Vancouver's rain did what Vancouver rain does, fell steadily without drama into the street. Inside the room, there was a lamp and a heater and a man with a scar through his brow who had spent 3 years filing something important in the wrong column. He wasn't going to make that mistake again. Rue Dupont had corrected worse errors than that. They say the most dangerous thing in a room is the man with the gun. They're wrong. It's the person who knows where the bodies are buried and shows up anyway. The one who built the system, reads the ledger, and understands the real cost of everything. Rue didn't take control of Golt's world by fighting for it. She took it by being the only one who'd known all along what it was actually worth. Was it love? Was it leverage? Or had they simply been trading in the same currency for 3 years without ever naming the exchange rate? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story kept you up tonight, hit that like button. Share it with someone who understands the pull of a dangerous man. And subscribe to Mafia Craving Stories. We'll be here.